So kia ora Kerensa and welcome to the Nelson Pod.
Kia ora Matt, thanks for having me.
It is great to get you on. So lots has been going on with Wakatū in recent times. First of all, let's talk about the Tents Agreement, the Nelson Tents Agreement, which people are finally talking about, and that's largely because of the work you guys have been doing and this big court case that has been happening in Wellington. The court process is finished. We're now waiting for the judgment. Can you give us like a beginner's guide to the whole Tents issue for people who don't know?
Okay, I'll try, Matt. I'll try. We've just come to the end of our 10-week hearing before the High Court in Wellington, so finished on Friday. This is my second day back in Nelson, so it's really good to be home. And that 10-week hearing really came off the back of a decision that the Supreme Court made in 2017. And in that decision, what the court found by a majority of 4-1 judges is that the Crown owes a legal duty or a fiduciary duty to the traditional owners of Nelson, Tasman and Mohua, Golden Bay. And that duty was to reserve 15,100 acres of land that's known as the Nelson Tents Reserves. And in addition to that, reserve and protect all of our papakainga lands, our occupation lands and cultural lands and so on. So that decision of the Supreme Court really came after, well over 100 years of advocacy before before Parliament, before the Waitangi Tribunal, in different places over many years that culminated in that Supreme Court decision. It really goes back to the settlement of Nelson in terms of its origins, and so many people listening will be aware of the New Zealand Company and their role in establishing Nelson as a city. I kind of tend to think of the New Zealand Company like private developers of their day. They were commercial people. They had a colonisation scheme for New Zealand. They thought they were going to make a lot of money. They actually go bankrupt by 1850. But certainly in the early days in 1841, when they were here trying to establish a second settlement of New Zealand, they were instrumental in the establishment of Nelson and in agreeing to the establishment of Nelson. A key aspect of that was this deal that becomes known as the Nelson Tents deal. And from there, the Nelson Tents are created. So the proposition was that 1/10 of all the land that eventually becomes the settlement of Nelson would be reserved for the traditional Māori owners in perpetuity, forever. And of course we know that some land was reserved, but never the full 10th.
Yeah. How much is there actually today?
So today there's just under 3,000 acres in total. And
how much should there be?
So there should be 15,100 acres, and then in addition to that, the cultural land, so our wāhi tapu lands, our occupation lands and so on.
Right. So if things go according to plan, what do you think is going to happen when the court comes back with its judgment? So
2017, the Supreme Court judges, make this legal determination after years of considering the case through the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and finally the Supreme Court. What they did in that decision was send us back to the High Court to work through three outstanding issues. So one was what is the extent of the Crown's breach with respect to that duty? So what did it actually do in terms of carrying out the reservation of the lands and so on? Did it actually reserve the full 15,100 or not? So we've been working through that over the last 10 weeks, as well as the extent of the breach. What are the remedies that are available? And we can come back to that, because for us that's first and foremost land, the return of the land. But in some cases that land has now passed out of Crown hands, over the years. So we had to work through potential remedies, and then The last area we were looking at were any defences that the Crown wanted to argue. So we spent the 10 weeks arguing about that, and we've been very clear in terms of what we've put before the court, in terms of what we're asking for and wanting the judge to decide. But like you said, it's a waiting game. We've got to wait probably, optimistically, about probably 3 or 4 months, but more likely we'll be into sort of mid-2024 before we get a decision.
And in a nutshell, what are you asking for?
So the rationale for the tenants reserves, from our perspective, was always about creating an endowment of land that would ensure the well-being of our families through the generations. So we say that land that ought to have been reserved is still owned by us. It's held subject to trust law by the Crown, and so where that land is still in Crown hands, it has to come back now to the families. So that's been the first focus, is very much the return of the land that should have been in the trust estate.
Yep.
And in circumstances where that land has now passed into private ownership or out of Crown hands, we're saying that the Crown has to compensate for that loss.
Sure.
So where they can't return the actual land, there has to be a compensation aspect.
And how does it work? So you said earlier that the New Zealand company was a private company, and now we're talking about the state. Why is the state responsible for the actions of a private company?
So what happens in that early part of our history is incredibly interesting in terms of what's going on and who's involved in terms of laying the constitutional foundation of our country and the legal foundation in terms of property law. And the Crown and the New Zealand company are really from day one working hand in hand. In many ways, the New Zealand company is the agent of the Crown in terms of in Wellington and then in Nelson and subsequently other settlements, really paving the way for the cities that they would become. In 1845, the Crown issues a grant to the New Zealand company, and essentially grants the company what becomes the Nelson settlement. So this huge area of land, 151,000 acres, and as part of that Crown grant, the Crown says you must also reserve 15,100 as Nelson tents and protect the cultural land. So really the Crown is engaged not only from 1845 but really from 1840 when the treaty is signed.
So presumably quite a bit of that land has ended up now in private ownership. Where are you hoping to get the land from? Are we talking about land that's Ministry of Education, land that's DOC? Where is it coming from?
Yeah, so we spent, we had the one in 2017, and we really have spent the last 5 years researching and preparing to go back to the High Court. So we do know where the land is, and also the Crown has had to account for, where is the trust property that it still manages. But you're right, it's what you would expect. It's land that's held by departments and ministries and so on. There is still a reasonably large amount of land in the Nelson region that's held by the Crown. One of the legal arguments we had in the court was around the definition of the Crown. So it's really interesting in our jurisprudence that question has really never been definitively answered by the courts. So we took a very broad view. We said the Crown is this significant thing that manages land, departments, entities and so on. The Crown took a very narrow approach to that question and said, well, Crown entities such as ACC, for example, Kāinga Order, these subsidiaries, if you like, that have been created over time are not part of the Crown definition. So that's going to be a really interesting part of the judge's decision, and it is material because obviously if the judge decides that the Crown is this narrow definition, then there will be some land that is not part of the remedy.
Okay. Are there people out there, do you think, though, that are worried that they have private property and that perhaps it was originally earmarked as part of the tents and they're going to be in the gun? Is that out there?
No. I mean, that's absolutely not part of the case.
Yep.
There's no legal avenue in our legal system for private property to be subject to a trust law case of this kind. So if people are feeling anxious about that, there's no grounds for that. I mean, we certainly haven't argued that. It's not possible to argue that. Our claim's been completely focused on the Crown's actions, and so the Crown will have to remedy, its breach of its duty.
In the play or the theatre production Tents, one of the questions that was asked of the audience was, where do you live? Are you living as your home on Tents land? How do you find out where the original land was?
It's actually really easy. So we've got, there are maps that clearly map out all of the Tents sections that were reserved, particularly in the Nelson CBD area. If you go to the library, John and Hilary Mitchell's volumes on the history of Nelson and Tasman have got all of the information, the maps, the detail about what land was selected as tents. And of course, those early maps, it's not just tents that are being selected, it's the recreation lands and private land for settlers' use and so on. So it's a really interesting snapshot of what was going on in our city in that period, sort of from 1841 to 1845, when all of those decisions were being made.
And it sounds like a long time ago, but it isn't really. Like, I often think about my great-grandmother, and she lived to 100. And if you think about, a few people living that kind of length, it's a while ago, but it still has a huge significance to life today, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it does, certainly for us, and I'm much the same as you, Matt. Doesn't seem like a long time ago to me. And in court, of course, we relied on a lot of our oral traditions and history. So, you've got people giving evidence who are talking about their, our great-great-great-grandparents and the stories that have been passed down. So, I don't think it's that long ago.
No, And what will it mean for iwi if you get the result you're after? How much of a difference is it going to make to people?
Well, I think, again, the vision that our whānau and hapu had when they agreed to the establishment of Nelson, the settlement of Nelson, I think was very much that we would go together as a community. That we would, in terms of prosperity and well-being, that would develop together. And that the kind of best of the two worlds would come together, our languages, our values, all the things we wanted to access that the settler community were bringing. But I think there was always a vision that, our way of life, our tikanga would also underpin this, and we would, go together. So for us, I think it's bringing that vision to realisation. Through the return of this, very significant asset base that ought to have been with our families from the beginning.
And is there a plan? So if you get the land returned, what is the plan?
Well, we're taking it, one step at a time, I would say. I mean, there's been a huge amount of work and effort to get to the end of what we've just got to, the end of the 10 weeks, which is we've been preparing for 6 years. I think the next phase, once we get the decision, will be engaging with our not just our families, but the community, and talking about what is the opportunity, the potential with this. Because I think that potentially could be very significant.
Can you paint me a picture?
Well, I think we, in the next, 30, 50, couple of generations, we've got so many challenges that we are going to have to face, particularly from a climate perspective. Some of the thinking that we've been doing is very much around, well, how do you build strong values-led communities to meet those challenges, whether it's around food security or just basic survival. So we are trying to think differently about how we really prepare for some of the challenges that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, there's been quite a lot of thinking and wānanga happening, but that will really start to fire up
Take shape
as we move into the early next year.
So in practical terms, how will it work? Like this action's been taken by Wakatū, led by Wakatū. Is that a good way to describe it?
Not. Well, in some ways, yes and no.
Okay.
So I'll explain. So Wakatū has been really instrumental in terms of leading this kaupapa, this issue over many years. Wakatū's created in 1977. Essentially as the trustee to replace the Crown trustee, who had managed the remnants of the Nelson Tents estate for many, many years. So Wakatū's created by its owners, who are the whānau and hapu of the Nelson Tents reserves. But for all sorts of reasons to do with policy, legislation over time, there are a number of whānau and hapu who also sit outside of the incorporation structure, so who aren't shareholders in Wakatū. So it's a broader group. It's not at the tribal, the iwi level. We're talking about the whānau hapu level, essentially landowners who whakapapa to the land that's part of the Nelson Tents reserves. So Wakatū's been front and centre in terms of leading this kaupapa, but it's essentially being led by our kaumātua, Rory Stafford, on behalf of the wider whānau and hapu group.
Right, okay. Yep. So let's say the court decides that land needs to be returned. Yep. How is the land then distributed?
So again, this is going to have to be a conversation with the if I just use the legal term, with the beneficiaries, with the whānau and the hapu. So we finished up in court last week, essentially putting forward to the judge how we think that process should work. And what we've asked for is for time to go out to the beneficiaries, talk about the various models that are available in terms of managing, the land, the whenua, and if there is compensation that comes back, then obviously that will be part of that corpus, if you like. And it will be a decision that the whānau have to make about how they want to design, what that looks like. Again, it's quite the challenge for the Crown through all of that has been this is a private law case. It's not a Treaty of Waitangi claim, so they can't just lay on their policies and expectations around that. We're in a different realm, a legal realm, and so it will very much be up to the beneficiaries to decide, just like any beneficiaries of a trust will decide, and the trustees decide what's the shape of this trust.
So how does it feel having got to the stage now the waiting game starts? How are you feeling?
Tired.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we've literally just got back, so we'll have a few days to recover, and we'll be thinking about the next phase again. But litigation is pretty grueling. Actually, it's not easy, to bring it all together, and then the whānau have to carry that for such a long time, and our kaumātua in particular. So we'll have a bit of a rest for a few days, and then we'll prepare for the next part.
And Kerensa, you're a lawyer, so how long have you personally been invested in this?
So about 14 years now, which is a really short time compared to the majority of our family. And our kaumātua in particular, who have been, Uncle Rore has been carrying this for over 40 years, as have, our other uncles and aunties around him, and before that, others. So that's a very short period of time compared to most in our family.
How did it feel seeing the story being told at the Arts Festival recently, on stage?
We were still still in court, but we got feedback from some of the community about it. And I love that one of our cousins wrote the play, and it's our whānau performing in it, and it's another way of telling the story. And for people who, for creative people, it's a great way of doing that, I think. So it was wonderful. We're looking forward to seeing it.
There's a great energy at the Theatre Royal on the night that it was performed at the Nelson Arts Festival, and I was very lucky to be there.
Yeah.
And a number of people said afterwards, it felt like we were at a time in history, like an important time in history.
Yeah.
Is that how you feel right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the decision that was made in 2017 for us as a country was a really constitutionally significant one. It was the first time that our highest court, have recognised that the Crown owes legal duties separate from the Treaty of Waitangi, but legal and property rights connected duties to Māori. So they drew on lots of Indigenous cases from around the world, particularly Canada, but it was a very significant decision for all of us.
Very exciting. Yeah, exciting for Wakatū. Hey, how are you feeling about just the way things are sort of feeling across the country right now? I think it's an interesting time. We're seeing these sort of conversations taking place finally. We're seeing things like the Tense play being on at the Theatre Royal, and there seems to be a lot of New Zealanders and Nelsonians who want to engage, who want to learn more, who want to work together going forward. But then at the same time we see Auckland City just voted against having a Māori ward, which was significant for that city. And we've seen a right-wing government, a centre-right government voted in, and they've got some of the support parties particularly have some strong views, and that seems to be going in another direction. What's your read on this?
Well, I think as we get more of a breakdown and understanding of the way that people have voted, I think that will be really interesting to try and understand, similar to what's just happened in Australia, is there a demographic divide? Is there an urban-rural divide? What is actually happening? I think waiting to see some of that information will be really interesting.
What do you think's going on?
I mean, what I think is that I think that that traditionally the people that do get out and vote and are very active are generally the older generation. I think generationally we are seeing quite a stark difference between that generation and the ones coming up, and certainly the people, the young people we spend a lot of time with, to me are so engaged, although they're not always voting, which is a concern, but they're not perhaps either they're much more curious and interested in different cultures, different ways of being, our history, in a way that perhaps some of the older generation aren't or haven't been exposed in quite the same way.
Right.
So I suspect it's partly that, but I don't know. I think that we did see something quite different in the Māori seats compared with what we saw in the general seats, and I think that reflects an age, a difference in age and tolerance. And so what I mean by that is, in those Māori seats, we're starting now to see what we call the kura kaupapa generations coming through, and just at the moment we've got this Kapahaka Nationals happening in Nelson this week. We've got over 3,000 people from around the country. Those are children who are fully grounded in terms of their understanding of place, of culture, identity. And so as those ones are coming to adulthood, we're seeing progression and a sort of unwillingness actually to go slow around things like climate response in particular, constitutional change, so much more demanding, I think, in the Māori seats than perhaps we're seeing in the general seats. So that's just one observation.
Yeah, and the other thing I love is that everyone is wrapped. that kapahaka is happening in Wakatū. You know, I haven't heard one person say anything disparaging about it. I mean, we seem to be really embracing these kinds of things now in a way that I think is really, really positive. And I agree. I mean, I think I look at our kids and their friends and everything else, and none of them strike me as young people who are threatened by difference, by diversity. They just see it as making, you know, for a richer life for them and for everyone, really. And I think that I like to think that's where we're going.
Yeah, I hope so. And I mean, I just it's hard sometimes. You know, my own family. You know, my dad's Māori, my mum is not Māori. She's Scottish. So through her, you know, I'm reasonably lucky in that I get to hear some views that perhaps I wouldn't be exposed. I'm not exposed to my dad's family because, you know, the sort of what I might consider racist comments really aren't shared there, but they are at times in, you know, in that other community. And when I hear some of the things I do hear, it often strikes me that they are coming from a place where there has been very limited exposure to, you know, not just things Māori, but it's whatever particular ethnic group we might be talking about. So I think the more that people are exposed to difference, the better.
Yeah.
And I know that that's not easy to kind of insert yourself into different communities and different places. That can be quite hard work. But I think that's the key, and I think our kids, you know, whether it's school or just the different kind of just their openness, they find that a lot easier to do. They're not necessarily just in their bubble. And I think we can all be a bit guilty of being in our little bubbles at times, and we think that that's all there is.
Yeah, a few people's bubbles got burst at the election, I have to say. I know some people who just couldn't believe what had happened, but and the way the votes had gone. So there's a fair bit of angst out there one way or another about all sorts of things, but are you optimistic about where we're heading in terms of, you know, the country and the region?
I'm nervous about the next, in the very short term, I'm nervous about the next 3 years because I think it takes really courageous leadership to be able to navigate some of the issues that, you know, that we've seen come through the election, and I don't think we've seen that. I don't think we've seen courageous leadership at that national level in this last, you know, electioneering round. So I'm nervous about the next 3 years, but I'm optimistic in the longer term because of the generations that I can see coming. Yeah. But at the same time, that we can't let ourselves off the hook, right? And kind of go, well, it's okay because we've got these great kids coming
they'll look
up.
after it, yeah.
We've got this huge responsibility. So I'm nervous about the next immediate period.
So thinking about the next 3 years, like, how concerned are you about how things are going to go?
Oh, yeah, I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. And I think what we want to avoid at all costs is kind of ending up where we were during the pandemic, when we became so fractured, I think, as communities, that we weren't able to have conversations with each other. And that's probably the thing that concerns me the most. Not that we've got different views, or some people have very strong different views, but if we lose that ability to actually be able to talk to each other, which I think we did to an extent through that time, I think that's really dangerous and scary. And so I think that's where we need really good, robust leadership with integrity to help us navigate through that. And it worries me, again, looking at the, you know, where we could be, that we might not have that in government. I hope I hope I'm wrong about that. But of course, our leaders don't just come from there. So I think we need people who are willing to, you know, be thoughtful and speak out, whether it's in writing or things like that, you know, things like this, or however we do it. But we just have to keep probably listening as much as talking. And
I think it's important to keep things in context. Like, some people will interpret the election result as a rejection of lots of things New Zealand has been doing over the last 6 years.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that simple. I think it's simpler than that. I think for a lot of people, the result was a reflection of people just wanting a change,
Yeah.
you know? And quite often I don't know if people think that deeply about it. So the fact that we got parties into government that are talking about, the treaty in a way that could be very divisive, for example, I don't think that means New Zealanders necessarily were going in that direction at all. I just think it's a reflection of people going, well, we've had 6 years of this crew, I'm not very happy about this, not very happy about that, I'm going to give the other guys a go. And I think sometimes it's easy to read too much into that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think sometimes people just want a change of voice, a change of, look.
Change of scene.
And then sometimes, we have I think New Zealanders are incredibly fair. That's one of our kind of characteristics. And sometimes it's just about, well, let's give someone else a turn.
Totally. Yeah, totally. It's like beach cricket, Yeah, it's the other side's turn. Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Michael King, the historian, he said in his history of New Zealand, he said something along the lines of he thinks that New Zealanders are fair and reasonable people, and he was very eloquent in the way he described it. And it was a much quoted part of his book for a long time. I haven't heard it for a while, but do you still think that holds true? Do you think that?
Yeah, I do. Someone was telling me about a study that was done around the world of different countries, and the study was to produce like one word that sums up the nation. And so for America, the word was individual. So individualism was a really strong trait that came through, and for us it was fairness. And so I do think that's our kind of saving grace, I hope, that if you can actually have the one-on-one conversations with people, often with the Nelson Tenth issue is a good example. Often when I sit down and talk to people, they say, well, of course that makes sense. That just doesn't sound fair, what happened. Of course that needs to be resolved. But if they don't have some of the basic facts around it, that they don't come to that necessarily.
Yeah. What about Wakatū itself and the things that you're involved in? Because there's a lot going on. What's exciting about what Wakatū's doing right now?
Yeah, there's always a lot going on at Wakatū, and I guess what's exciting for us again, we're still very conscious that we're in the tail, if you like, of the pandemic. We've still got some time, I think, as a country, as a world, to work through a lot of the issues. So I would say we're reasonably cautious about sort of making big changes or decisions over the next kind of year and a half as we continue just to see things settling down. Yep. And then in the meantime, we just keep investing in our community and our families, our cultural development and so on. We've got, in terms of the conversation that's been going on around the CBD of Nelson this past week, we are very, we've got a few ideas in terms of the land that we hold within the CBD and how we could kind of unlock some of the potential here.
What are you thinking?
So we were talking a little bit earlier about the Mahitahi development. So that's our land that runs along the riverfront, really, where the current Nelson Library is. And again, we've been working on that plan for a number of years now. And we were all set to go just before the pandemic in terms of breaking ground. Suffice to say that was all paused through the pandemic, but we still very much, for us, that's a place where we can see, housing, green space, public space, great public buildings, retail, but, all designed to try and open up the CBD and, bring people into it because, as we've been talking about, it's beautiful. There's so much to do. So much
to do, and so much potential. What sort of time frame are we talking about now then?
That's a good question. So we're continuing. We're still working away in terms of thinking about potential tenants. We wouldn't sell any of that land, so we're holding the land, but the development obviously is happening there. We've just been to Denmark to again have a look at what's called the Climatorium, based in Denmark, which is quite quite hard to explain actually what the climate
I know.
is, but a kind of a place where people come with all their ideas and projects, and a sort of convergence of science, business, community. Yeah.
Is it like a research centre?
Yes and no. Research, action. I mean, it's orientated around, projects that should be driven from the community up, and then implemented and so on. So those sorts of ideas we've been investigating, with a view to what would that look like for the precinct.
And the proposed land swap that was being talked about in the last term of council, which involved the library land and that council land, that's off. Where's that at?
I would say that's off the table with following the change in council. But that might be a question for the council. But I mean, that was something obviously we were committed to investigating. We wanted to build a library, and again, it's not probably to use the word library again, not quite right. What is this? But we wanted, a really something significant there for the community.
Frustrating. Yeah. Okay, and for yourself, like, how long have you been chief executive now?
6 years.
6 years. What's your plan?
Well, in terms of personally, my plan is to keep, the focus for me very much is always on doing all I can to ensure our organisation is really strong, sustainable, that the well-being of our whānau is as good as it can be. So that's my focus, rather than try not to look too far ahead. Okay,
but you're happy in the job for the foreseeable, right?
Yeah.
Hey, and good things happening, great things happening in Motueka as well, around Te Awhina Marae. You must be wrapped with that.
Yeah, we are. So that's 20 houses that have been built this year, and are in the process now of getting families into those houses. So deliberately aimed at, trying to get first-time home owners into those houses. So that's really, really exciting. That's great.
And that's going to change people's lives.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, we really, we hope so.
And is that just the first stage that you're planning out there? Is there more on the way?
That is not at this stage, no. So that's we'll settle for a while, and then there'll be some other development around the marae generally. In terms of the papakainga housing, that will be it for a wee while.
Okay.
But I'm sure there'll be more to come.
And what about beer? You're doing good things with beer as well.
Beer is Hop Federation, so that's our craft brewery based in Motueka, and we've just built a new brewery for the guys out in Motueka, so that's also very exciting. They're happy to be in a much bigger facility.
Yeah, where is it?
That's on Whakarua Street, so just off the high street.
Yep. Can you go in there and have a beer?
Not yet.
Is that the plan?
Yeah, it is a plan.
Okay.
But not quite. But it's a great facility, so that's good.
Are you going to keep the Hop Federation packaging the way it is at the moment?
I think so. Yeah, for now. Yeah. Have you got some?
No. I love
feedback,
it. I really dig it. I think it's really nice work, and I believe Galen King did it some years ago for Lucid Design. I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think it's really has stood the test of time.
Yeah, it's quite clever. It's just simple. Obviously the hop. Yeah.
And very eye-catching.
Thank you.
And it's very nice beer.
I'll let Marina know. She'll be happy about that.
So that's exciting. And what about research, like in terms of what you're doing with crops and things? Can you tell us anything about that?
Yep. So this is slightly connected to the climatorium conversation we had before. And so we're in Motueka. We've got roughly 200 hectares of land in apple, pear, kiwi fruit production. Most of it conventionally farmed at the moment. We've adopted what's called our whenua order strategy. It's a 20-year strategy to convert our crops from conventional farming to what we're calling tikanga-led regenerative. So they're coming into the 4th year now of our crop research program, where we've been working with with our whānau on developing new Indigenous crops and trying to grow them, in a really light touch way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the plan is that, we will transition over time to crops that are much, comply essentially with our whenua order strategy.
Right. And in the long term, what will the impact of that be?
Well, the hope is that the impact of that's going to be the health of our land, our whenua, our waterways, and most importantly our people is assured through those practices that we're really learning about, I would say. So we're trying to bring the best of science together with the best of our traditional knowledge to work out, what is it that we could or should be growing on that land. It could continue to be apples over time, but again, we're looking out, over a long time period, trying to work out what is the best solution for that, for that land.
Interesting. Do you, your role, Wakatū is involved in so much stuff, and as chief executive, do you sometimes feel, that's a pretty big job, quite a lot of responsibility, just to keep you up at night?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. And we've got there's a great team. So there's the people, all of the people that I'm lucky enough to work with, not just in the organisation, but the bigger whānau as well, are pretty amazing. Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Hey, Kerensa, thank you very much for your time. Covered a lot of topics. Very interesting to talk to you. Good luck with all this work you're doing. It's great that we've got you in Wakatū doing this great work. And all the best.
Thank you, Matt. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Now, what I would like